They roll in the surf as helpless as driftwood. Their sleek, shiny bodies, normally so graceful and fast, now stiff and awkward, at the mercy of the waves. Many of them already buried like black rocks in the sand. This stranding of pilot whales in Tasmania, Australia is not unique. Similar whale strandings occur every year all around the world. And the most widely accepted theory for such extraordinary behaviour by these highly intelligent creatures has been mass suicide.
Whales do not suicide. They get themselves into trouble and they can be rescued.
Two Australian conservationists, Laurie, Levy and Neal Bethune, fiercely rejected the suicide theory. They believed that not only did whales not strand themselves deliberately, but that they could be rescued. This is the story of their fight to prove that belief, their fight to save the whales. This time, not from the murderous persecution by man, but from the tragic results of their own behaviour. Strawn is a small, pretty township, sleeping quietly on the shores of giant Macquarie Harbour in Tasmania, Australia's island state. Its coastline of rocky cliffs and long, lonely beaches lies on the traditional migratory route of sperm whales as they travel from the warm Pacific to the icy waters of Antarctica.
It's believed the whales beached themselves 6 o'clock yesterday morning. Originally, there was 26 of them, but it's believed 2 have escaped out to sea. By late this afternoon, 6 of the remaining 24 had died.
We first heard from a television news broadcast, and by the broadcast, everything sounded hopeless. The whales were suiciding, and nothing could be done for them. And we knew that wasn't the case. We knew that those whales were not suiciding, that they were just in trouble, and that it was possible to rescue them. So we flew down the next morning, and when we arrived, there were whales right along the beach, some already dead and some still very much alive. We had no idea at that stage what we could really do, and we just set out to try to see what we could achieve to rescue them.
But just moving the stranded whales, let alone rescuing them, seemed to be a hopeless task. Many of them were up to 50 feet in length and weighed around 40 tons. They organised volunteers with shovels to try and dig a channel to refloat the whales and allow them to swim back out to sea with the tide. But as fast as the holes were dug, the sea filled them in. A bulldozer fared a little better, but when the tide came in, the attempt to refloat the whales failed, and the technique was abandoned. Despite the failure of these enthusiastic, clumsy rescue efforts, there grew a conviction that somehow something could and would be done. For the first time, Levy and Bethune witnessed the intense emotional response that stranded whales generate among the people trying to help them.
The awareness factor here has been fantastic. It couldn't have been better. The rescue operation has been led by Peter Davis from the National Parks and Wildlife, but the people around have responded beautifully.
It was Ranger Peter Davis who achieved the first breakthrough. While using his boat to try and help one of the whales off a sandbar, he observed something that was to provide a vital key to successful rescue in the future.
I was trying to push its head round in the boat, just gently, nudge its head round and get it in the right direction. And it rolled, just rolled completely over, tried to swim ahead again, couldn't, rolled over again, tried again, and on the third time it rolled over and hit the deep water, and then with a little bit of a guidance, it got out through the entrance.
Peter came back in and told us about the rolling action. He felt it was a breakthrough. So we tried it on a small whale we were trying to rescue, and it worked. She got her balance back, and a little later, she swam out to sea.
But the discovery came too late for most of the whales. By then, only a few remained alive. Next morning, on a cold, deserted beach, One of them died in circumstances that had a profound effect on Levy. The whale was stranded well away from the water, and the chances of rescue seemed hopeless. Ranger Peter Davis suggested to Levy a gun be used to end its suffering.
Now, I've always hated guns. Guns cause pain, suffering, and often agony. And we debated the issue for quite a while. The ranger said that if I really cared for that whale, I would not want to see it suffering on the beach. So I agreed. I went against my feelings and my better judgment. And it was the biggest mistake I ever made. 5 bullets were fired into the whale. And it didn't die. It thrashed around in agony, and it bled. And we both felt pretty bad. And I sat with the whale until it died. It was 15 hours. I talked to it, I stroked it, and I suffered with it. There was no way that I could really undo what I'd done, except to make sure that this did not happen again. And ever since then, I've fought against the use of guns on whales.
The death sparked fresh determination in Levy to try and rescue the sole surviving whale, trapped in an almost impossible position in a shallow, rocky bay. He recalled the dispersed volunteers, including scientist Bill de la Mare, internationally recognised for his work with whales. It was decided the whale's only chance was to tow her to deeper water. A local fisherman and his crew provided their services free of charge for the rescue attempt. The whale was badly sunburnt, but there still seemed to be plenty of life left in her 30-ton body. Yet for all her size and formidable power, she was as gentle as a lamb with her rescuers.
Towing a whale backwards is risky at the best of time, and we weren't well equipped on this occasion. A whale has very sensitive, soft skin around its tail, and you should always have car tubes or canvas to protect it from the rope.
After 4 attempts, the rope was finally secured and the towing began. They also faced the danger of the whale drowning if its blowhole was submerged for too long. Whales need to come up to breathe every 10 seconds or so in a stressful situation. But with this whale, they didn't have a choice. It was a last resort. The rope was removed and the waiting began. Would she have the strength to swim away? For half an hour they watched for signs of life. Signs that never came. The rescue attempt had come too late. Of the 27 whales that stranded, 7 managed to save themselves, and only 1 was saved by human rescue. Levy and Bethune were downhearted, but not defeated.
My feelings on Strawn were that we had achieved something. We had, after 3 or 4 days, the media was talking about rescue, not suicide. They were talking about rescue, and I had a personal commitment to that one whale to do something to rescue whales in the future.
But if suicide is not the reason why whales strand, why then do they come ashore?
There used to be a belief, very commonly held belief, that whales committed suicide by swimming ashore, but nobody I think really seriously believes that now. Man, to my best of my knowledge, man is the only species which has been granted the privilege of guns and poison and knives and such like things with which to commit suicide, not forgetting the gas oven. But other animals don't have this facility. My own feeling is it's a complicated interrelationship between navigational failures due to false echoes being received off the bottom in shoal water conditions. Most of our strandings here in Tasmania, for example, take place in areas where there is shoal water immediately offshore. So they come in there, they get false echoes from their echolocation. They then, one goes ashore and yells for help, and they all come in to help, and before you can say Charlie Farnsborn's, a whole lot of them are heaped up in the shore, and there's general panic, and we're back to square one sort of thing.
McIntyre Beach, a small bay on the east coast of Tasmania, is typical of the whale trap described by Dr. Geiler, as it proved 9 months after the Strawn stranding, when this herd, or pod as it's called, of pilot whales came ashore. 180 of them.
Whales have such an incredibly strong social loyalty that they will always go to the assistance of a member of the pod in difficulty. But the problem is that they become stranded too. And once they're stranded, they lose their muscle control. At McIntyre Beach, their difficulties were made much worse by the strong wind and the heavy surf. When the waves continuously crashing on top of them in shallow water, they find it hard to keep their blowholes clear. Water enters their lungs and they drown, just like you or me.
And we're so helpless. If you look at the size of these things, you can't roll them in this sea, you can't tow them because the tails are too sort of tender and soft, and you feel so helpless.
Levy and Bethune, 480 kilometres away in Melbourne on the Australian mainland, heard of the stranding from a news report and flew down to see what could be done. They arrived with a small group of volunteers, some 15 hours after the stranding. But when they reached the beach, they were greeted by a grim scene. The outgoing tide had left the sand littered with sleek, still bodies. About 50 of the whales had managed to get themselves back out to sea, but of the remainder, only 16 were still alive, distressed and vocalizing in high-pitched cries. A handful of people had stayed on in the icy darkness to comfort them and try to keep them alive.
When you first arrive, you feel totally inadequate to handle the situation. There are so many whales and so few people that you feel helpless, and the whole thing looks impossible.
The wind had died and the sea was now calmer, but without people, the equipment, or the experience to stage a rescue operation, the talk once again strayed to death by euthanasia.
Causing too much suffering.
Yeah. I don't know what your experience is with that, but you can suffocate it.
For the second time, Levy was asked to take part in a mercy killing.
There were 2 large pilot whales here amongst the rocks. And the wildlife officer believed that those whales should be put down. And he was a man who genuinely cared about those whales. And at first, because of my previous experience, I wouldn't agree to it. And he said the same words. If you care for those whales, you won't want to see them suffer. And in the end, I agreed. And the wildlife officer believed that he could put the whale down by suffocation, by holding kelp over the blowhole. It didn't work. The whale suffered, and it took 20 minutes to die. The whale next to it, on the rocks, in the same position, was rescued the next morning.
The painful failure of yet another well-meaning attempt to end a whale's suffering stung the group into action. It was decided to attempt the rescue of a small whale near the shoreline. The tarpaulins were placed under the body and the whale was moved back into the sea. As it became buoyant, the whale was rocked from side to side until it regained its balance and swam off into the darkness. Elated by their success, a second rescue was attempted, but the freezing conditions and lack of people drove them from the water. The rest of the night was spent keeping the shifting sand away from the whale's blowholes and planning for the next day.
If you look at what we're going to do tomorrow now, let's say guns are definitely out. Guns are only going to cause more suffering and more misery.
Mm.
So guns are out. The first priority should be rescue.
The dawn was promising. Clear skies and a calm sea. At 6 a.m, with the help of a TV news crew, another whale was rescued. It set the stage for a triumphal day. The good news travelled fast, and the beach was soon packed with people anxious to join the rescue. While adults helped dig half-buried whales from the sand, bands of children kept others cool, protecting their sensitive flukes and flippers from the heat of the sun.
Rolling a whale down the beach is the easiest way to do it. It also expels gases from them. You've got between 3 and 4 tonnes of weight. And it's much easier to roll a whale because they actually roll with you. All you're doing is giving them the momentum and they can manoeuvre themselves over. Now, when you first get them back in the water, they usually have muscle cramp. They lisp, and if you just push them straight out, they really can only move in circles and the waves will wash them back in. So what you do, you rock them from side to side and roll them over. And that might take half an hour per whale. And they're working with you. You can feel the power coming back into their bodies. When they're ready to go, they certainly let you know. And when their circulation's moving and they've lost their muscle cramps, they'll often swim around you a couple of times before they move out to sea. And it's a nice gesture.
Success inspired the growing crowd on the beach, and one by one, the living whales were returned to the water. The larger adults first, followed by the younger ones, with mothers and babies being returned together.
Because the small young whales are the easiest to move, many people make the mistake of trying to rescue them first. And what happens, of course, is that they come back in again to join their mothers or the older members of the herd. That's why so many people still believe the suicide theory, because the young ones restrand. And that's why in a rescue it's absolutely vital to start with the big ones first and the babies last, and always with their mothers.
The sun grew hotter, but the care and attention lavished on the beached whales by children ensured they were returned to the water with their delicate skins intact.
I've never seen a whale die when people are looking after it. And there's no doubt in my mind that those whales want to stay alive. Unlike us, the voluntary breathers, they actually have to consciously think about breathing. So if they wanted to die, all they'd have to do is decide to stop breathing, to simply shut down. But they don't. They want to live.
Again, there appeared to be a natural rapport and understanding between the whales and their rescuers, with the large animals never threatening or endangering anyone with sudden, violent movements. With each whale, the same rolling and rocking techniques were energetically and effectively applied. People reported that in many cases, the whales actively assisted in their own rescue. By 2 o'clock, all the living whales had been returned to the sea except one, and this last rescue was the most satisfying of all. It was the whale that lay next to the one that was suffocated the night before. Its position seemed inaccessible, high up on the beach and surrounded by rocks. But with the use of tarpaulins, the whale was lifted and rolled into the water. The conditions made it impossible to apply the rocking technique, so instead a rope padded with canvas was attached to the tail and the whale was towed to deeper water. Divers untied the rope, and this time the effort had not been in vain. The whale slowly regained its strength and, blowing loudly, circled the boat a number of times and then headed out to sea to join the rest of the waiting herd. "36 hours after the stranding, 13 whales had been successfully rescued, and although many more had died, it was spectacular proof that whales could be rescued, the kind of proof that is sometimes needed to spur governments into action." In Canberra, the Australian government announced the start of the first national contingency plan for whale rescue, while Tasmania came up with a contingency plan of its own, one that was to have a vital influence on the next major stranding in that state. And the architect of that plan was a man who, before the McIntyre Beach stranding, thought that rescue was almost impossible.
Well, the first thought when I saw that scene of the whole beach covered in whales, most of which were dead or dying, was one of panic in a way. The main problem I could see was that these animals are so big and so heavy that initially I didn't think that it was possible to even move them. And I guess the main learning experience we've all had here is that what seems impossible may not be impossible. And, well, basically, I guess the advice would be not to give up hope. It is amazing what people can do in physical effort and what a well-orchestrated effort can achieve.
Part of the Tasmanian plan is a special rescue kit based on the tarpaulins that proved so successful at McIntyre Beach. At this dolphin stranding, shortly afterwards, every surviving animal was returned to the sea using this new improved version with strong plastic material and carrying handles. The tarpaulins proved highly effective in helping transport the 300-kilogram animals to another beach with deeper water 4 kilometres away. To ensure the dolphins moved directly out to sea, they were all released at once, except for this baby who wasted no time in finding its mother and swimming happily out to sea again. Levy and Bethune had now both left their jobs as cameramen with the TV station and were working full-time for the welfare and protection of animals.
We see the battle to save whales as setting an example that could be achieved for other animals. We'd like to think that people will just automatically stop and help any animal that's in trouble or distress. If it's injured, they should see that it gets proper treatment from a vet. Or if there's a chance of it being hit, like this wombat, then it should be moved away from the roadside to safety. I guess what we're really saying is that animals have rights, the same as people, but they can't speak up for themselves and say, how about my rights? What about my feelings? Then someone has to do it for them.
With whale rescue now accepted officially as both feasible and worthwhile, Levy and Bethune prepared for the next stranding. They did not have long to wait. 4 months later, yet another herd of whales was deceived by the treacherous entrance to Macquarie Harbour in Tasmania. This time the victims were 51 pilot whales.
When they first came in, they came up on the sandbar and the tide was going out and they were getting high and dry out of the water. So what we've done, we've rolled and pushed them back into the water so that they can at least swim around and keep cool. The biggest problem we have with the sun will kill them fairly quickly. So if we keep them in the deep water, we've got a chance of getting them out.
But you can't do that indefinitely. What's going to be required, do you think, to get them to leave once and for all?
Well, hopefully they may make up their own mind to leave. If not, we'll just keep trying to work them down the spit until they get into the harbour, the entrance itself, and then I'll try and herd them with the boat. That worked with the sperm whales when we had the last one.
So what do you think the chance of success is?
Fairly good, although I think maybe one or two of the older ones may have been injured slightly.
By the time Levy and Bethune arrived, the Tasmanian Whale Rescue Contingency Plan had already swung into action, and a camp for volunteers had been established on the beach. The whales on this occasion were in good condition, and with the cold, drizzly weather, there was little risk of dehydration. Only the bigger whales in the pod were grounded, and the calves were still swimming freely around them. One of the calves was badly cut with ugly abrasions about the head, but over the next 2 days, those wounds would heal with remarkable speed.
Many of the whales were suffering from cramp and on their side, which meant they had difficulty in keeping their blowholes out of the water and breathing. There was a real risk they'd drown, and if a wind came up and the seas became choppy, we knew for certain we'd lose them. So there wasn't any time to waste. We had to try something fast.
Elizabeth Island on the map, over.
The first rescue target was a bull whale, which they tried to move to deeper water by rigging a tarpaulin sling alongside the boat. But the animal was too big and the technique was abandoned. It was then decided to move the whales by guiding them, one by one. But the whales weren't happy. They became distressed at being separated from the rest of the pod and tried to rejoin them.
Their social bonding is just so strong and they talk to each other all the time. When we started moving the female whales early that day, the calves were swimming around our legs trying to nuzzle us away. But as the day went on, they seemed to realise that we were on their side and helped us push their mothers off the sandbar. The National Parks officer saw one of them actually swim a few metres away from its mother, charge back at her at full speed, ramming into and under her body, lifting it off the sandbar and into deeper water.
It became obvious that the whales would have to be moved, not individually, but as a group. This again proved to be frustratingly slow, but as they inched towards the harbour exit, both rescuers and the whales showed remarkable patience.
When you're moving whales and working with them, there are times when they get angry with you, but it's never an aggressive anger. They'll flap their tails in the water, they'll often chatter their teeth if they're a pilot whale. It's a bit like a mother scolding a child, and they'll communicate through their eyes. They can't smile, they don't have any facial expressions, but they certainly show their feelings in many ways. It's a wonderful feeling to be with an animal so large and yet so gentle.
The rescuers were finally driven from the freezing water by exhaustion. Levy was on the brink of hypothermia, but at least the whales were now in a good position for the rescue to be completed the following morning.
Rescuers are suffering from exposure to the cold through literally holding the whales in position to prevent them beaching themselves again. The Emergency Division of the Salvation Army is on site supplying the rescuers with basic needs.
This whole bay is a classic whale trap. They're on a sandbar, which is probably about 100 metres long. They're in trouble. We need more volunteers. Their strong family ties are keeping them together, and we're having trouble getting them out.
Is there any point continuing the rescue?
Oh, yes. We'll get them out.
The National Parks and Wildlife have called on volunteers from all over the state to help with the operation and appeal today for wetsuits as rescuers are tiring due to the cold conditions.
Next morning, All but 2 of the 51 whales were still alive, and extra volunteers had boats assembled for the final rescue attempt. This time, a new strategy was adopted: follow the leader. The biggest bull whale was carefully tied by rope to Ranger Peter Davis's boat. 2 inner tire tubes provided protective padding for the sensitive tail area. The bull was then towed into a position where the others could follow, as they were helped off the sandbar. And follow they did, responding as expected to the distress calls of the bull. So the slow procession to the harbour exit began, the small armada of boats working hard to keep the whales on track. But just a few hundred metres from their target, the whales stranded again, going to the aid of a whale in distress.
It was amazing. 2 of the whales were trying to support a third distress whale that was upside down and having trouble breathing. When their rescue effort didn't work, they directed it to a sandbar where they were able to roll it over. The rest of the pod then joined the distress whale and its 2 helpers on the sandbar. A good example of how a stranding happens and the reason for it.
A vet took a blood sample to check later to see whether illness or exhaustion was the cause of the distressed whale's condition. The unscheduled stop also gave rescuers the chance to tag the whales with coloured ribbons around their tails. The waters of the entrance were dangerously rough, so the rope with the bull was transferred to a larger fishing boat, and the final leg began. Success seemed assured, and then suddenly the whales became confused and threatened to turn back into the harbour. It looked as if all the work of the last 2 days would be lost.
You guys just do a crisscross along here so that I can't get past you.
But the rescue boats set up a noise barrier by revving their engines, heading them off and pointing them once again towards the sea. The pod now moved swiftly towards freedom, a freedom that the bull, which had led them to safety, would not share. In the middle of the rip it drowned, its massive body finally succumbing to the long tow and the ferocity of the rip. The remaining whales surged clear, and at their head, the small calf which earlier had appeared so grievously injured. For Neal Bethune, it was a moment of complex emotions.
It was a beautiful feeling seeing those whales go out after spending 3 days of very little sleep, cold, often hungry, and at times wondering whether all that you'd worked for over the past years was in fact going to work here. It's that determination and that pushing yourself to an extra limit often is not normally there in trying everything you can to get those whales back out. While you're doing it and you're pushing yourself, you're okay, but as soon as you stop, that's when the exhaustion really sets in. And that was the case. As soon as those whales went back out, there was a feeling of exhilaration, but it was really short-lived because the job that you'd set out to do was all over. And that's when you had time to sit back and think of the whales that you'd lost, that you tried so hard to save, and the physical exhaustion came back in, so you really dropped your bundle.
The Macquarie Harbour rescue was a spectacular success, 47 out of 51 whales were saved, and aerial surveys over the next 3 days confirmed that they had all gone safely out to sea and not restranded. Shortly afterwards, the Australian government completed its national contingency plan for whale rescue.
I see it as a blueprint. It essentially, highlights the specific issues and how strandings might happen, and then how they might be handled. And then it gives the state guidelines on which they can build their own individual plans. We've had many requests from overseas countries for copies of the Australian plan. And in fact, several countries have said that they were thinking of doing something like that, but our plan was so good, they're just willing to accept it with slight modifications, I guess, to the local needs. When people are concerned about whales, not worried about the science, they're emotionally concerned. And I think there's a lot of people don't understand this, the pressure of the emotions of people. They feel an association with whales. And perhaps from that point of view, science doesn't matter much. It's really that at the bottom of your heart, you believe that they are something very special that should be protected.
Levy and Bethune committed themselves even further to their cause by forming the Whale Rescue Centre to organise and coordinate volunteer participation in future rescues. It was cruelly ironic that with their confidence riding so high and public support mounting, that the whale rescue movement should then receive a massive setback.
I'll let the RSPCA know about it beforehand.
On a hot summer's day at Point Hicks, on a remote stretch of the Victorian eastern coastline, 87 false killer whales strand over 15 kilometres of beach. Up to 20 feet in length and weighing anything up to 3 tonnes, these animals are quite different to the great killer whale, often known as orca. A day that was to end in tragedy began with hope and enthusiasm. Although Point Hicks is isolated, there were many holidaymakers on the beach, and right from the start they took a positive attitude. Throughout the day they made energetic attempts to rescue the whales. Since whales do not have pores in their skin and cannot perspire, they need to be kept cool, and children provided them with continuous, vital relief from the burning sun. Despite the rough surf, several whales were successfully moved back out to sea, and Levy and Bethune believe many more would have been rescued if the holidaymakers had had some help and guidance in rescue techniques. But people reported that it wasn't until late in the afternoon that the fisheries and wildlife officers who were on the beach gave them specific instructions on how to roll whales.
In fact, they didn't even bother to tell us about the stranding. We first heard about it from a newspaper reporter. And by the time we'd organised a plane, we didn't get down there until the end of the day. And the situation looked grim. About 60 of the whales were dead, but the ones which were alive were still in good condition. And we knew from experience that even a whale that looks on the verge of death can be saved. Our best hope was to wait to the next day when the wind was expected to moderate and the seas would be calmer. Unfortunately, the fisheries and wildlife officers had different ideas. They told us that in their view, rescue was impossible and the whales would have to be shot. We just couldn't believe it. Supposedly expert people were talking shooting instead of rescue. We argued with them, we pleaded with them to give us more time. Whales regain their strength during the cool of the evening, and first light is always a good time to start a rescue. But the fisheries and wildlife officers wouldn't listen. In the end, they said that if we could prove to them that we could get a whale back out, the killing wouldn't take place. Now, the seas were rough, and most of the holiday makers had gone back to their camps for the evening. And the chances of a successful rescue seemed remote, but we had to have a go. We were desperate. And amazingly, we managed to get 2 whales back out to sea, and 3 people nearly drowned in the process. But it didn't make any difference. We had tried everything to stop the killing. There was nothing else we could do to stop them. So we filmed the slaughter, so that at least we would have the evidence to show the public and the media, because we knew that they would react with horror, just as we did. At 7 o'clock that evening, 19 whales had still been alive on that beach. They shot them all. The next day, the wind dropped and the sea was much calmer. And we had plenty of people. Perfect rescue conditions.
Levy's prediction about a savage public response was accurate, but the officer's action was defended by the then Minister for Fisheries and Wildlife, Mr. Evan Walker.
I certainly back up my officers in what they did, but I also determined at that point to say that there should be no more euthanasing of whales without my specific direction. But when the volunteer groups said, hang on, we don't believe it was necessary, I take them seriously too. And my job is to say, well, if there's a difference of opinion, we've got to get these two groups together. We really must, because the volunteers are absolutely essential when a whale beaching occurs. What we need to do is get them out quickly and, if possible, get as many whales back into the water as we can and to rescue as many whales as possible.
Out of the tragedy, at least one positive step emerged: the formation of a committee to develop a whale rescue plan for Victoria, a committee that includes Laurie Levy and Neal Bethune. They have both made it clear that no rescue plan will be acceptable to them unless it contains one clear provision: that stranded whales will never again be shot. They are determined to see that the whales at Point Hicks did not die in vain.
It's extraordinary that after centuries of persecution and murder by man, that whales have such a gentle, tolerant attitude to humans. With incredible brutality and ruthlessness, we have decimated almost every single species of whale. I don't know how we will ever make it up to them, but at least we've made a start.